afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Hey, you know what? I think you're going to find this segment quite interesting, and it might be a little bit surprising. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply teachings of Freud to a lot of what we're seeing in the world today when it comes to people being offended by various things, wanting to ban people that they don't agree with from speaking various locations in the United States and also Britain. And also this idea that we need to ban art and advertisements. And again, I think you'll find it surprising of where it could be rooted from. But before I begin, I would encourage people to subscribe to this station if you're listening to this later on YouTube. Subscribe to this station so you can keep up on new shows in case, you're not available to listen to this live. And also, check out my website that's linked at the bottom. And, if you like dystopian science fiction with a philosophical and psychological twist, I would encourage you to check my new book out. And that is The Destiny of Our Past. And you can find that on Amazon. So anyway, what would the esteemed psychologist Sigmund Freud have to say about what's going on today when it comes to this new wave of censorship? Well, first I'd like to just give a little background. And that is, I remember back in the ancient past when I was in high school that the left would, I had teachers that were at least by those standards would have been considered liberal and democratic. And they really believed in freedom of speech. And I really admired these teachers. In fact, one of them I worked on his political campaign when he was running for a county commissioner position. And very intelligent person. But, the irony was that one of the lessons he taught that I still remember was how the First Amendment, which guarantees the freedom of press, guarantees the freedom of speech and religion and assembly, is a double-edged sword. And that is that when we hear something we like or we have a viewpoint that we like, we really want it to be out there, and we would be very angry if someone tried to ban it. And that goes for people of all political persuasions. It would feel like, someone's trying to ban us, so to speak. But yet, when there's a viewpoint that goes against this, especially when it starts veering into socio-moral issues, then that is when we might start thinking, well, I can make an exception here or there. And the thing is that you got to realize that people that have the opposite view of yours feel the same way about your viewpoints. And so many of them would like to make an exception when it comes to your viewpoints and what you might consider, I don't know, art or whatever. Now, the thing is, this can be explained by human psychological composition, and that is that when we are growing up, we get a sense of what is right and wrong. And that is presented by our parents for the most part. They teach us that, for instance, this is the right way to do things politically. And that can even be subtle. Parents may never even take a stand on politics. outwardly, like I'm a Republican or Democrat or whatever, or right wing, left wing, whatever. But they will, in the sense that they will make comments about various issues. They'll give their opinions. There might be something on TV where a character acts a certain way, and they'll give that character praise, or they will condemn that character. And, it could be like a businessman. They could be saying that this character, he seems to be a really great guy. And let's say he's, some sort of big businessman and so forth. Or they may say, oh, look at this greedy guy. He shouldn't have what he has. And that can influence the way you start thinking when you hear comments like this over and over. It could be racial. Someone could make a comment about someone's race, and then a person might develop a negative attitude towards people of that race. It could be a positive or negative statement about religion or a particular religion, and then that gets reinforced, and little by little you create the subconscious composition of that individual. And then they will have a schema or a way they look at the world that will be based on that. And it doesn't mean it has to be rational or irrational. All right? We don't look at issues and think, okay, let's calculate this out and see what the pros and cons of everything from what we eat for breakfast to, in most cases, how we feel about political issues. Because we can't study every single political issue. We can't be experts on everything from nuclear disarmament to how to alleviate third world poverty. All right? It's impossible. So this is why we may take a stand, but no one can be said to be an expert in this. It's an emotional thing. It's like Edward Bernays, who of course was Sigmund Freud's nephew, who used his viewpoints and findings and theories to develop modern advertising. And the thing is, we get this attitude. And then, of course, in the democratic races we have, and I mean that in democracy in general, not the Democratic Party, we may have 20% on one side that really knows what's going on, but still they can be influenced. 20% on the other side that has the opposite viewpoint, and they know what's going on, but of course they could be influenced too. But then you have 60% of people who can be influenced by just slogans and the appeal to emotions and so forth. And often that irritates the two extremes in political fights. But the thing is, this is just the way that our society is set up. It's the way a democracy is set up. And yes, you may have someone who's a political scientist who has studied issues up, down, and sideways, but her vote will mean no more than some lady who votes for a particular candidate because she likes the fact he has red hair, and she thinks that's pretty hot. So, and this is true for all people, male, female, old, young, whatever. Although I think it tends to be a little bit more the case with young people, as they often have not delved into the issues and had a lot of life experience with issues. It doesn't mean that they're less intelligent. It means that many have not really seen things in the real world. And that's why, for instance, we don't let 14-year-olds vote. We keep it at 18. I think that was Richard Nixon that lowered the voting age to 18. Prior to that, it was 21. Now, here's the thing, though. Let's say that very crucial subconscious that's being molded in when you are young. Now, the thing is that what should be kept in mind is that people tend to think in an emotional manner. I hate to use this term, but back when, in the 60s, it was the inner child. Okay, you get in touch with the inner child. But in reality, our subconscious is like an inner child. It feels threatened. Then you feel threatened. And when someone speaks out against or for something that you have the opposite view, you feel threatened. Now, here's the thing though. In our modern society, we have strived to make sure that people have this respect for one another. That for a democracy to take place, to exist, you have to have a free exchange of ideas, or else it won't work. I mean, once one side starts crushing the other side, putting restrictions on it, so it cannot express itself, then you really don't have a democracy. You have something totally different. And of course, it varies in degrees. I mean, you could say that America in the 1940s was not quite as open with a variety of ideas as it is today. It was still a democracy, but it was more limited. There was a more narrow window of issues and how you could express them. However, that window, even though it seems to have expanded during the 70s and 80s, seems to be contracting again. And I think that is the natural way people look at things. I do not think the idea of letting everyone speak and being tolerant and all this is the way humans are in a natural sense. Or else we would have democracy as a default mechanism in the entire world. And in our entire history, for that matter. And that's not the case. What we have is varying degrees of, kind of repressing. And the more open societies, those of, let's say, Western Europe or the United States, they are willing to try to say, hey, look, calm yourself. Don't let your emotions get the best of you when someone speaks out against or for a viewpoint that is opposed to yours. Now, the thing is that in the development of our psychology, and I said I would get to Freud here, the problem that we have is that we have, and this is very general, we have the id, ego, and superego of the human being. That's the way Freud tried to break it down in a somewhat metaphorical sense. The id is our instincts. The superego is our what we've been taught is right or wrong. Now, most of the time when you had that kind of psychology 101, or maybe your high school psychology, and you were introduced to this, it seemed like the id was sort of the bad guy. It's all those instincts and drives, wanted to get out and do naughty things. But they were the things that, were necessary in our survival. We needed to be able to go out and hunt, which means you have to kill, or you needed to defend your tribe against another tribe, whatever. I mean, you had to have these things built into you, or else you would not, continue and be able to perpetuate your genes. So our ancestors had to rely on the id in order to survive. Plus two, reproduction. Now, the superego is usually, people look at that and think, well, that is the higher order reasoning, the morals and so forth. But I would actually say that in this particular case, the superego is what is the most dangerous when it comes to freedom of speech. And you're thinking, what? How can that be? You're thinking of the superego as being like a Greek philosopher like Plato or Socrates in their flowing white robe and standing up on Mars Hill and giving a lecture to the people. That's the way we think of it. But that is also where we have our ideas of what is right and wrong. And the problem is there's an interplay between the superego and the id. The id is kind of that, oh, let's push the boundaries. Let's do this. If it feels good, do it. Whereas the superego is saying, no, this is wrong. Mom told me this back when I was 2 years old. Now, of course, you don't think that way. When you're older, you forget where you heard it. In the same way that here, an example, you don't remember who taught you that 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can go back and think, well, let's see, who was my first grade teacher? Many of you won't even be able to remember his or her name. Or maybe it was your parents that taught you this. Well, if you're homeschooled, obviously you're gonna know who taught you 2 plus 2 is 4, but you won't remember the instance that you suddenly realized 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's buried deep in your subconscious, as well as your views on what is right and wrong. And that, where dad said, good boys don't do this. Or mom said, look at those people over there. They should be ashamed of themselves. And this is in the superego. And that's where people get scared. All right? I mean, in a sense, you could say our freedom of speech and liberties is license to unleash the id. And if you think of it, think of the hippies in the 60s. They kind of got into that viewpoint of tapping into the Jung's shadow or Freud's id and expressing yourself and letting yourself be free. And often with the hippies, I'm young. I mean, I was kind of in that kind of in between age, where you were too young. You were too young to really be into the hippie thing because you were maybe like 6 or 7 years old. Too old to really get into piercings, because that came in much later. So some people call that a cusp age and so forth. You're kind of in between generations, so to speak. But the thing is that should be kept in mind is that with that license, of course, we had things like young women going to like Grateful Dead sort of concerts and stuff like that, dressed in very revealing attire, and or I should say sometimes a lack of it, or at least that's what it seemed like when once I went and worked at a venue outside of one of those concerts. You saw a lot of people just kind of doing their own thing, and that included at times, even though there was police driving down the street, and this was a few years ago, they just kind of ignored people smoking marijuana and, that sort of thing. But the thing is that some people were predicting that this was going to be the future. That everyone, I remember once watching when I was a little kid, and it terrified me. I was a little kid, maybe 6 years old, and I was watching, my mom had some sort of thing on TV, and there's a little girl, was asked by the host, she was about 6, and he said, what do you think life is going to be like, 50 years from now? And she said, I think probably people are not going to wear clothes anymore. Well, it's been 50 years, and, of course, the people still wear clothes. But I think that it would have been very improbable that you would have had a situation where all of a sudden in the future that you would have, people running around naked and doing whatever they want to do. Because this kind of goes against the human nature that's established by what Freud talked about with the superego. Because there's going to be a certain level of, for instance, with nudity, you're going to have the idea, well, that's associated with reproduction. Then you're going to have, no matter what, a society is going to have certain rules about reproduction. And regardless of how you may say, well, yeah, it's not in that context or whatever, it's still going to get back to that. And therefore, a society will set rules according to clothing. And so again, we go back to kind of a default norm, and that's set by the superego. The superego will also, again, like I said before, it has that idea of what is right and wrong established by your parents. So when someone speaks and says something that you disagree with, all of a sudden it causes you to have discomfort. And that can be if a conservative hears someone from the left, even if this conservative is highly tolerant and actually likes to have interchange, it's going to set off those parts of the brain associated with threat. And the same is true of the liberal listening to a conservative. Now, the thing is, we also throw into that superego the idea that we should respect one another and not react violently, not throw things, not go crazy when someone says something we don't like. But what happens if that starts to break down? And I think we're starting to see this. We're starting to see a kind of a change in our culture where many people on the left who we used to associate with high levels of tolerance have become more like, let's use the state or let's use university campus authorities or whatever to crack down on what we don't like. Now, it used to be universities were just like, okay, here's a school and it, might have some rules set up, but it didn't actually have some sort of, what would you call, quasi-police functions. Now many of them do. And so they set up codes. And, if you break those codes, you may wind up, expelled from school. And these codes may not have anything to do with things that you would associate with something you get kicked out of school, like, cheating on a test or something like that. But, things about speech and expression and so forth. And people are starting to say, many people on the left are saying, let's go ahead and use these. Just like people on the right used to use morality to say, okay, males and females should not be in the same dorm house after 10 p.m. That used to be pretty standard on university campuses, sort of an enforcing of sexual rules by people that were, more conservative, because they felt that, well, if young men and young women were in dorm rooms together after a certain time, then they were likely to start doing things that, were more than just discussing their readings in Nietzsche. So that's kind of turned around now to where we see something just as prudish when it may come to everything from speeches given by students to even some campuses questioning the kind of jewelry you might wear, saying, well, if you're from, let's say you're wearing jewelry that is associated with a culture that's not yours, which they call cultural appropriation, that may not be right, and so forth. And the temptation that I think comes in is that when you have the power on your side and you know how to muster your forces, then you start imposing these rules. Saying that, well, you can't wear this particular outfit on Halloween because it's cultural appropriation. And then you say, well, wait a minute. I am dressed up as a matador, and then what's wrong with that? Well, you're not Spanish. And you say, well, yes, I do have Spanish blood in me. What are you talking about? And still they'll say, yeah, but you're still appropriating it. And you're like, what? But the thing is that it goes even into speech. Now, the problem is, and here's the major problem, Freud talked about what's known as projection. All right. And also what he called, reaction formation. Projection is when you have a viewpoint and then you project it onto other people in order to make yourself feel better. So if you're somewhat of a sexist, you feel that your sex is superior in some way, and then someone gives a speech that you perceive is sexist as well, then if you attack it, it makes you feel better because you're atoning for something within yourself. And also you're saying that person is bad, let's punish them. Taking, of course, the guilt from yourself and throwing it onto someone else. I've seen this with war where someone will be saying, oh yes, I support peace and this sort of thing. And then they'll say something like, they should kill those people. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought you were for peace. Yeah, but those people, they don't believe in peace. And you're going, well, yeah, but how can you be for peace if you say we should kill those people? And they'll say, but if, we kill those people, then we'll have peace. So essentially they're speaking totally Machiavellian, and they're employing the same kind of logic that someone who's a total warmonger would employ. The ends justify the means. But again, they're going to project out. And if someone comes to the campus and they happen to have been, I don't know, in the Bush administration or something like that, and then they're going to be like, oh, we got to stop the warmonger. The warmonger should not have a right to speak. But yet, if someone from their political party supports war, then it's like, oh, it must be okay because he or she is striving for peace, even though they may have bombed these countries. And so that can explain a lot of this kind of antagonism. The other thing, just to give you a brief explanation, there was this thing that Freud called reaction formation. And this is where you bury your subconscious drives so deep that they come out, but in more hostile, aggressive ways. But you're not aware of it. See, projection, you're aware of your hypocrisy to a certain degree. You might giggle about it in private, but you're still aware of it. Reaction formation, you're not. And often people that have high guilt complexes, ironically high empathy people, are going to be most susceptible to reaction formation. And I remember when I was in college that I had a friend who was he was active in Jewish politics, but he was also active in Republican politics. And one day, this guy from one of the peace groups just grabs him and, it becomes rather violent with him. And you would think, well, that sounds hypocritical. This peace person goes after a person who is much smaller than he was. And also, because he had a different viewpoint on politics. He was conservative and so forth. But I'm sure if you'd interviewed this guy, still remember how he looked, long hair and stuff like this. If you'd have interviewed this guy, you would have found that he would have justified it in Machiavellian terms. This guy's going to ruin the world with his viewpoints, sort of thing. I remember another case where some high school girls had shown up. I think it was, I think George Bush was coming to campus or something like that when he was vice president to speak. I think it was Bush. I can't remember which, but these young, they looked like high school girls had shown up with a sign that was in favor of him. And there were some people from a organization, there were some counter protesters that, they looked like, kind of hippie-ish, but that, no disparaging on hippies, but they just kind of looked like they probably were not in support of this speaker. And they started throwing dirt and rocks at the young women for their sign. And this is more of a reaction formation situation in which you believe the other side has these viewpoints that you're trying to suppress in your mind. Okay? Maybe the animal rights person who throws a bottle of blood on an old lady who is wearing a mink coat. They feel this hostility. Maybe because they subconsciously would, or at least they feel like if it wasn't for their superior upbringing, they could be wearing a mink coat and contributing to, as they would say, the cruelty to animals. And so the reaction formation is more of a hostility that is not seen in the person, but they don't see it themselves, but they unleash on others in order to feel better about themselves. I've often said that some of the people I've known who've been the most atheistic, really fighting atheism, you find out 10 years later they're active in a particular church. And it could be that atheism when they were younger was an attempt to suppress the religion, the desire for religion that was in their minds in the first place. So they had to lash out and by their saying, no, there is no God, loudly and forcefully, and always being the one who takes that stand in a classroom where they were the minority, that this was their attempt to keep from being pulled in to their inner desire to be religious. So essentially these people that are doing these attacks, the people that are saying, let's ban this, let's ban that, are the ones who are scared of their own subconscious desires. Now, I would say the same is true of, for instance, with conservatives. I could say that the same is true with pornography. And without getting into the issue of pornography, whether it's good, bad, harmful, destructive, whatever. The thing is that often you find the people that are the loudest in condemning and wanting laws against it are the ones who actually are using it the most. And so maybe when you have people that are saying, well, we can't allow this conservative speaker to speak, they're scared that they're conservative. They're scared that this inner part of them that's questioning their ideal that's been established by, whatever their experiences were growing up could actually turn out to be just like that person speaking. And that's why they become so agitated. Therefore, now I'm not saying this is true for everyone. I'm not saying that the average nun wishes that she was a stripper and the average stripper wishes she was a nun. No, quite the opposite. The thing is that most people can kind of suppress the desire to lash out and to try to use force to cause someone not to be able to do something. Now, the thing is, it makes us more comfortable not to have uncomfortable situations out there. Therefore, if it was a vote, if someone had a right to vote on whether a communist should be allowed to come to, onto a university campus, or a very conservative person comes to campus, you might find that it'd be broken down by party lines. Maybe the Republican type people would be voting to ban the communist, and the more liberal Democrat ones would be voting to ban the conservative. But it wouldn't be something that would cause them to go out and take an active part themselves. And I would hope that in a society of tolerance, people wouldn't want to be banning people. But that is still something that Freud would explain. Okay, we've built, in his Civilization and Discontents, he said that the veneer or what separates civilization from chaos is very thin. It can break away very quickly. And so when you see this kind of push back on democracy, then you have to realize that this is this could be what people would in their natural state would promote. That, no, I don't want this. And the ones that are really, really threatened will go the step further. But the people that are saying, I wouldn't do this, but I'm not going to do anything about it, they'll not really take a strong stand to stand up, as Voltaire would say. As Voltaire said that, I may not agree with your opinion, but I'll die to make sure that you're allowed to present it. Well, most people are not Voltaire. Most people, and I don't even know if he was really serious. If there's a barroom fight over this, if he would have stepped in to defend the person supporting democracy and free expression and so forth. So it's going to be determined in many ways by that small fringe on both sides and their competition with each other, but also that they're, how far they will take, depending on how they see the public and the public's view. I think conservatives would be I think that conservatives ultimately would be more inclined to allow freedom of speech and expression because of that idea of, well, that's what the Constitution says. But there are some things I think that conservatives would ban. Let's say a controversial art exhibit that might feature something that is blasphemous, towards Christianity, for instance. But at the same time, the left has even shown that they have, I saw some article recently that the left was saying that maybe artwork that features nude women there should be a reconsideration of whether that should be on display in art galleries. So, if both sides have the things that they might not prefer to see or want, or, a conservative might say, well, I don't think they should have a girl in bikini advertising this certain product on a billboard. But then the left could say the same thing. The left is saying the same thing. Oh, well, we don't think that you should use sexism or whatever, objectification in order to sell a product. They both agree with each other. But then again, if both would get their way, then you would have a degree of censorship. The thing is that you have to keep this mentality in the society, and I think that's going to require education. It's going to require people from both political parties to be able to say we have to continue with a high level of tolerance. All right? Barack Obama, he said a while back that it was dangerous that college campuses were starting to ban speakers based on their political beliefs. That instead you should have a free exchange of ideas. Challenge someone, don't ban them. And this is something that must be promoted in a democratic society, or eventually it's going to start getting chipped away little by little. And I think from both extremes. They may have different reasons to do it, but they will chip away and chip away and chip away until you will not have the freedoms that you have right now. And it won't matter if someone says it's going to be based on, well, we feel that what you're doing or what you're saying goes against our religious text, or we feel it goes against the norms that we've set in our progressive culture. It's not going to matter. It's still going to get banned. It's still not going to be there. And so you really have to understand the Freudian dynamics involved in this. And if you haven't studied Freud since high school, or probably you never even really studied it anyway, you should. You should take a look at the ideas of reaction, formation, projection, guilt, as he explained it, and so forth. It'll give you I have to say, I had a class, and it was a very, very liberal teacher. He was a really good teacher, though. In college, it was a political psychology class. And, I learned more in that class about how politics really works, both at the political level and the public level, than any class, any combination, but I could take 10 other classes and throw them together, and it would not have taught as much. And I would encourage people to examine the issues in this context. I would like to deal with something that is, I would say, extremely important in regards to the safety of our society. And that is what's going on with this whole so-called Russia Gate or Russian probe, or there's a Russian hiding under our bed type of thing going on in politics today. Now, the problem I'm having with this is that we live in a world in which there are two things that could bring the United States down. Now, the first is a nuclear war. Okay? If there's a nuclear war, there's nothing left. All right? If there was a full-scale nuclear war, I don't know what kind of secret bunkers that super elite people have. But for the most part, humanity would be wiped out. And only the people that were able to hide away, I guess, for a year or so, and hopefully there'd be enough out there for them to eat. Maybe they'd be able to find, kind of like a Walking Dead, go around and scavenge through homes and so forth, and what do they call that on The Walking Dead? Going on a run or something like that, I don't know. And get, eating food that the survivors had left until the atmosphere or the soil or whatever was still, able to be planted and, be able to harvest food and so forth. The other thing that could bring the United States down is the petrodollar. And to be honest, there's really no incentive that Vladimir Putin has to wreck the U.S. economy unless the U.S. itself is trying to wreck the Russian economy. Now, most people are not aware of how the petrodollar works. If countries stop using the dollar as the reserve currency, so to speak, to do major trade like in petroleum, then the value of the dollar collapses. The value of the dollar goes downhill because there's less demand for it. This would sink the U.S. economy. This is why the United States is so connected to Saudi Arabia, because Nixon was able to get this in the early 70s. And, this deal. We protect you. You make sure OPEC uses the petrodollar. Few people know what the petrodollar is all about. Very few. And I threw this out on a discussion forum. Just saying, what happened? I just threw the question out, what happens if the petrodollar collapses? And most people had no idea what I was talking about. And then when I said something about, well, it's a deal that we made with Saudi Arabia, and no one looked it up. Maybe one or two people did. This is a discussion forum that has thousands and thousands of people signed up for it. And some were saying, we don't need Saudi Arabia. We make our own oil now. So you see, they thought petrodollar referred to the oil supply. And it doesn't. Now, if you poke at Putin so much that he's able to use his influence to get countries maybe to go off of the petrodollar and go on to regional currencies or some other currency like the euro or the yuan, then what does that do again to America? Well, if Trump gets his border wall, the irony is it'll be Mexico wanting to make sure that Americans aren't jumping the wall to try to get jobs in Mexico. Yeah, it's that serious. Now, why then antagonize? Why get into this game of poke, and try to stir things up? Well, I think that in the United States, there is a certain level. I mean, I think some of the people that are doing it know that there's this kind of latent hostility from the Cold War era that is in people's minds, and they're just using this for political points. They're feeling like, oh, Russians are exotic. Russia is exotic. It's often like the bad guys on, various spy thrillers and so forth. So we dangle this, Russians in front of them, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, these are the bad guys, and we need to, how dare people, try to have, dialogue with Russia. Then of course there's the arms industry. Remember that whole thing? If peace broke out, what would happen? I mean, you've got to keep a threat going, or else Americans are going to question, why should my son, who I have raised, and he's 18 years old, and you've gone through all of that, trouble and sacrifice of being a parent. Why would I want to send him off in a war that could cost his life instantaneously? Or why do I want to support dozens and dozens and dozens of military bases all over the world? Or why do we need an aircraft carrier that costs more than, the gross domestic product of some states in a year? This is so the defense industry has something to gain from this. So, this goes back to Eisenhower's military-industrial complex, where he warned that while we need to have a strong defense, there's a danger that the companies that make the war armaments will get too much control in the government, and they will promote the idea of, oh, we need to have more of this. And this, I think, can be fueling much of this. So you have politics, just regular old Machiavellian, the ends justifies the means sort of politics, combined with economic desires. Got to keep those weapons coming out. And who do we build the weapons for? I mean, who's the threat? There may be a lot of countries in the world that do not like the United States, but they're not openly, threatening the country militarily. It's more of an ideological thing. I mean, if you've ever been around the world, you'll find many people around the world really despise the United States. Sorry, it's true. And so, but they're not like, well, we're going to build tanks and bombers and airplanes and go get them. Now, the one thing I will say is, I've been to Russia on numerous occasions. Haven't been there for like 10 years now. But I did notice when I first went over, around 2000, 2001, people were pretty positive towards America. A lot of people were taking English. They really had this like, America can be our partner in the future. And then various things started taking place where America went totally against Russian interest by expanding NATO into countries along the borders of Russia, by various actions in both Southern Europe, but also in the Middle East, and then it started to become kind of a growing negativity. Now, I don't know how the Russians feel today. I haven't been on the streets of Russia to ask people. Like I said, about 10 years since I've been there. But I can be pretty sure that it's probably not as warm and friendly as it used to be, when you realize that your economy could be growing at a much greater rate if it wasn't for a whole bunch of sanctions put on you. Now, a lot of people in Russia were, from my understanding, positive towards Trump getting elected. That's a good thing. But because of all this fake Russia stuff in the elections, you may have gotten to a situation in which, now Trump cannot afford politically to open up to Russia. He can't remove sanctions. He may want to, but he can't, because it'd be political suicide to do so. He can't open up good dialogues with Putin, because then everyone's just, in the media is going to be saying, see, it's true. He did, he is in the pocket of the Russians. So anything positive that comes between Trump and Putin is seen as some sort of conspiracy by many people in especially the Democratic Party, but also some within the Republican Party, and of course the media. And so right now, Trump has his hands tied. He cannot positively engage Russia on just about anything, which means then that the Russians have grown closer to China. Okay, China and Russia have become much closer allies economically, but also Putin has now a good incentive to try to get rid of the petrodollar and to actually work against American interest. So in a sense, this is very dangerous for the United States. This whole, let's just demonize Russia and the Russian people and create this, situation, whatever the intentions are, whether it's just to undermine Trump so that Democrats get elected in 2018 and then 2020, or if it's to tie his hands behind his back so he can't do anything. It's going to end badly. That may not be today, tomorrow, or even next year. But think about what if America succeeded? What's its goal anyway? Is it to destabilize and destroy Russia? Is that the goal? Is it the goal, to suddenly have all those resources available for America? The interesting thing was, if that was the goal, this could have been done during the 1990s, when Russia was in really bad shape, when its economy didn't even hardly exist. Okay? And might be able to offer Russia money, we'll buy your country or something like that. I mean, it was in really, really bad shape. And so I don't know if that's really the goal, to just plunder the resources. Is it to always have a bad guy to focus on? Well, that's a possibility there too. Like I said, with the defense industry. Is it to tie Russia's hands so America can be doing whatever it wants around the world, including who knows what America has planned against China in the future? That could very well be as well. But regardless of it, do you think the Russians are stupid enough not to know that that there are things that are designed the things going on out there? Do you think that other powers in the world are too stupid to realize, hey, maybe there's something going on here that is more than just a political show in the United States? So, regardless of how you feel about Trump, okay, some people love him, some people hate him, whatever. Isn't it in our best interest to be working with the country that has the largest nuclear stockpile in the world? The country that could, a lot of Americans think, yeah, we'd go over there and take over Russia overnight. No, you wouldn't. Russia's not going to allow anyone to take any of its territory. Okay? Now, it might start with small tactical nuclear weapons to make sure that whatever army goes in there is disintegrated. But then that wouldn't last long until there would be, big ones going back and forth. So, and then of course with the monetary wars, if you want to see if the Russians were successful in some way to change the petrodollar in a very significant part of the world, then I would strongly suggest that Americans learn Spanish, because they might need it to get a job in Mexico or other parts of Latin America in the future, because it would be devastating for the U.S. economy. So ultimately, where should this Russia thing go? I don't know. I think that sometimes when you get a hysteria grow up, that it won't go away. And maybe this was the ultimate bar in the spokes, so to speak, to prevent anything really meaningful taking place when it comes to U.S., Russian, and also Europe foreign policy.